many years. This here is a Nexus Lexis search of cases involving Dr. Michael Heath from 2002. As you see, it's quite thick. It involves several cases, and these are not just the proven ones. These are cases that he has been involved with. Now, there is a pattern to his work. Every time he sees a stabbing, it's incredible the amount of stabbings that have considerable force. And yet, he doesn't actually refer to the evidence that would actually prove that there was considerable force, such as bruising on the body and underneath, where you would have, and traces of it, where you would actually see it. Now, also, if the knife goes into the hilt, as Dr. Heath repeatedly says, how come the people's hands don't slip down the shaft of the knife and cut themselves? Where is the testing for foreign blood stains in all of this? But more importantly are the proven cases against Dr. Heath. There is a transcript of I have a transcript at home in an inquest called Ibrahim Say, and the person who conducted the cross-examination of Dr. Heath in that case was Patrick O'Connor QC, and he absolutely mauls Heath in this transcript. He asks him a couple of questions, and Heath says that the reason he hadn't qualified as a forensic pathologist earlier was he was very busy. So Patrick O'Connor kept questioning him and says, "Do you mean you haven't passed the exams?" And eventually Heath was forced to say that he had repeatedly failed the exams, and that was why he hadn't qualified for the Home Office register. Now, Michael Heath has been removed from the Home Office register. He was allowed to resign after he was found guilty by the tribunal. But the tribunal has only considered two cases, and that is Kenneth Fraser and Stephen Poacher. There are other cases. There's Victor Borman, Malcolm Byrne. That case was quashed the very day the tribunal opened. That case Dr. Heath actually managed to say in that one that the person had died before the fire had happened. But he fails to explain why there are fire product traces in the lungs and in his breathing, in his windpipe. Even by Heath's standards, that is exceptionally incompetent. Yet, Heath should not be scapegoated alone. There is a problem with other forensic pathologists. Paula Lanus managed to stop the tribunal against her, and Home Office struck her off the list anyway. So I think we need to look not just at various cases, but look for the proven ones. There are others. There's Craig Curren, there is Philip Johnston, and other cases as well. If anybody needs information on this, come and talk to me afterwards. And I'll finish off with the next point, which is the Damilola Taylor inquiry recently managed to find who was actually responsible for his death. And this involved an absolutely horrendous mistake by a forensic scientist named Sian Hedges. She managed to miss blood staining on the trainer of one of the Preddy brothers and the clothing of the other. In the trial that followed, she was asked to explain this. She has no explanation. She then goes home and comes back and says that she'd been thinking about it overnight and that she thought that she would have done a presumptive test and that it must have been negative. Nobody asked her where her notes were of these tests. And also the fact that we know for a fact it was blood. So why was this negative? Well, the answer is it wasn't. Because the circumstances for a false negative in a presumptive test did not apply in that particular case. This is most likely perjury. But the investigation into what happened in that case and that mistake isn't looking into the possible perjury of Sian Hedges. But it raises a more important fundamental question, and that is, in both of the two cases where there is a degree of exoneration, i.e. the Cardiff 5 case and the Damilola Taylor inquiry, it only happened because of cold case review. In other words, when nobody was in prison serving time for these crimes. How many people in jail today are there because there is no cold case investigation, there will not be a cold case investigation, and they will not find evidence such as this? Thank you.
That's an absolute model for every delivery everywhere, loud, clear, and to the time. Yeah, very interesting. Thank you very much indeed for what we've just heard. I was model my own lifestyle a bit on your excellent system. I'd like to ask now Barbara Stone, sitting next to me, if she will give us her 20 minutes on her brother's case.
I'm Barbara Stone. For those of you who don't know, I'm actually Michael Stone's sister. Michael, and I just have to call him Mick from now on, because he's been my brother, and that's what he's been to me all his life.
Can you stay near the mic so that they can record you? Thank you.
Twitchy feet, sorry. Yeah, I call him Mick, as I said, from now on. He was convicted on a series of self-confessions that aroused my interest in them. At the first trial, there were several self-confessions. All of these witnesses stood up in the court. At the time, I had no experience of miscarriage of justice. I didn't even know there was a phrase or a term used for the kind of evidence they were given at that time. And despite the defences and our QC's experience, they didn't seem to know either. It's debatable, I think. But anyway, afterwards, straight away, within 24 hours, one of the main prosecution witnesses went to a daily newspaper and immediately said that he lied. Michael hadn't confessed to him at all. From that moment on, I've more or less devoted the last 9 years to looking into self-confessions, to trying to get them overturned, to looking how they're constructed. After a little while in Kent, we started up a group, Kent Against Injustice, and straight away the members were coming in. And the first thing that I noticed was there were 2 other cases very similar to my brother. One was in 1982, one was in 1996, and then there was my brother's, convicted in 1998. I looked at all 3 of these, and I thought, wow, look at the similarities in them. So the first one I looked at, and I thought the date was strange. So I noticed that's the first thing they had in common. Nearly all the self-confessions, well those 3 and the ones that I've looked at, are usually, they come about within 2 weeks of a date when that person would have to be released. Sometimes it's a rush job, it will be done in the day before, sometimes in the cells underneath the court at the time when there's going to be a probable release. But not usually more than 2 weeks before the date when the defendant's likely to be released. Secondly, if you look at the self-confessions, the first paragraph will be taken up with, I've never seen this person in my life. I don't know who they are, and I've never heard of this case. I've been tucked away in the back of beyond, for goodness knows how long. I don't know nothing about this case. Well, the 3 cases I'm talking about, well, clearly in my brother's case, there isn't a person in the country that couldn't have known about it. And if you're in prison and in a local prison, you definitely know about it because you know he's being ghosted from one prison to the other. I looked at the other 2. And they've got similar levels of profile, but only locally, but nevertheless everybody knew about them, and I knew about them when they came. And prior to my brother's conviction, or arrest should I say, I'd only really looked on it as a general interest, so I just watched the odd programme, so I knew them both. And then we get on to the next bit. They've never had any contact with anybody who knows these people either. This may be right, it may be wrong. But since most self-confessions, as we call them, originate in prison, and these prisoners are moving from one prison to the other, I find it highly unlikely. And you know, usually it's kept in the same area. And then when you look closer, you can see that all of these prisoners have had contact with somebody who's had contact with them. So there's another link, and it will always be like that. Well, I dare say there are the exceptions, but my experience is. And then we get down to the details of the crime. They have to be vague, or else you're going to be able to contest what's in them. So it will be general. Oh, he told me he strangled someone, he killed someone, or he stabbed someone, or he did something. It will never be too precise, it has to be in the vein. And the other strange thing about this aspect aspect of the self-confession is that there'll always be a word. I thought he said, in my brother's case, stone, or was it stone, or was it stone? And you look in the other ones and there'll be a similar thing, there'll always be this word. But they haven't quite heard properly, whether it's through the cells or the drain pipe or wherever it comes from, they haven't heard one word properly. And then there'll be a gruesome detail in it. That detail is designed to shock. And it has to shock because, I mean, this evidence is not very good anyway, and they've got to get a jury to believe it. In one of our cases, allegedly, our person said, she smiled as I strangled her. I mean, if you're a jury member, can you imagine the effect of that? And in my brother's case, I had an orgasm over the swimming costume. Now, bearing in mind this child's 6, can you imagine the effect that a statement like that has on them? So all these self-confessions contain this kind of information. And of course at the end, they never received a payoff. They're not police informants. They've done no favours. In fact, they don't normally even give evidence. That's, and I thought, well, fine. So we're on to a winner now. Anyway, as I've begun to understand these and as more information became available, we narrowed my brother's case down to one self-confession. Unfortunately, the other thing I should mention about the 3 confessions in Kent is when you actually look at the bottom of the statements, they're written by the same police officer. So in our case, I mean, it's clear signs of some kind of, I don't know, maybe they have a police training day for self-confessions. I mean, clearly they're well structured, they're all signed by the same officer. I can only guess what's happened. In the case of my brothers, there's just one self-confession that remains. Now, we're at a real loss now, because our last attempt, I mean, I should explain, the first trial, he sounded quite believable. He didn't look like he took heroin regularly, he didn't look like anything other than a nice young man, really. He wore a nice shirt, he was well presented, he stood well, he'd clearly been looked after before he got there, and his evidence was almost believable. And to be quite honest, apart from rumour and innuendo, we weren't able to touch the evidence, really, for quite some time. But then, as you know, we had an appeal shortly afterwards, and we asked for a PII hearing on Daly, but we were turned down flat. It was all done rather deviously, really, but we never got one. So we go to the second trial. By then, we're becoming aware that Daly's lying. We asked him, did you lie at the last trial? He said, yeah. No. Do you lie all the time? Yes, he said. And then he went on to tell another great cracker. He said that he described how Mick spoke to him through the drain pipe, and his drain pipe was so hot, he had to put a towel there so it didn't burn his ear. You understand the sound test showed that once the sound was at a level where you could hear it through that drain pipe, you could hear it up the corridor, cells both sides, and everywhere else. So anyway, he went through this elaborate thing where he put his ear against the towel to protect it from the heat. And then someone said to him, well, was the heating on? And he said, well, yeah, the pipe was hot. But it wasn't turned on until 10 days later. So here he is, caught out in a lie again. But anyway, as you know, Mick's convicted again, unfortunately. We go back to the Court of Appeal. 2 days before we're due back at the Court of Appeal, I'm approached by a witness who says, I was in the prison with Mr. Damien Daly and 2 other people, and he bragged to us that he lied to get your brother out of prison. To get your brother convicted and get himself out of prison, should I say. And I thought, wow, this is a bit good, isn't it? So off I trot down to Dover in the seedy underworld, where, I can tell you I was scared that day. And having gone from one address to another to find this person, who was obviously quite well known in the criminal world, I walked into his house terrified to be greeted by a parrot that went, hello! And I just kind of shook there. But anyway, we got this evidence, we located, and the reason I'd gone there was because he knew where everyone was in this area. So we got this evidence together. We sent out private investigators to take statements. I mean, bearing in mind we're 2 days away from the appeal, and all we could get was 2 statements. And Hampshire police were brought in rather quickly, and their idea was to quickly investigate this so that we could use it for the appeal. They did investigate that. They arrested one of our defence witnesses before he'd even given his evidence, and he was held over on charges of perverting the course of justice. He was taken to a high-security prison for non-payment of fines. At that point, he was told that his wife and children have been attacked at home. Now, and also the guard said to him, you're going to get what's yours. Now, as it happens, the attack that happened at home was totally unrelated to what had happened, anything to do with Mick. It was totally unrelated. But this poor guy, who's now in a high security prison for owing £30, is obviously understandably very nervous. And the effect of that was that he actually said that he didn't want to give evidence anymore. But the other two people were spoken to, they made statements, and then again they withdrew them. And the Court of Appeal decided in their infinite wisdom that they wouldn't admit this evidence anyway. And they wouldn't admit this evidence because Daly had lied at the first trial, he'd lied at the second trial, and there was no point in us going to the Court of Appeal or introducing new evidence of Daly's unreliability, because the jury already knew he was a liar, and to show more evidence that he was lying would be useless and have no value really. So of course we're stuck in a bit of a situation now. The only evidence against my brother is a self-confession. That self-confession is now found by the Court of Appeal to be unreliable. So you think, well, how can you find the evidence? But in truth, there are other avenues, because there was a lot of DNA at the scene that hasn't been identified. It's there, but it's not my brother's. I mean, this would include hairs in a balaclava, a bootlace with DNA on it, fingerprints, blood, semen. It's all at the scene, none of it's my brother. And Mr. Heath was the pathologist and the person responsible at the scene. So we're kind of thinking that we're going to get somewhere with this. And we've also asked the CCRC to investigate the corrupt practices of the police relating to those witnesses. Further on from that, some of you may have seen me on the telly a week or two ago. My brother, as many of you probably know, has mental health problems. And this has been going on since our childhood, really. We fought and fought and fought to have this, to not have this published. We didn't want it published. It contains a lot of details. I mean, I have to say now it's available to all of you. It covers some details from our childhood, which I would prefer people didn't know. It contains a lot of mixed medical details that we would prefer people didn't know. You know, as you know, we lost a legal battle when this was released. But when I went and got it, I wasn't allowed to read this. You know, I was not allowed access to this. Everybody who had it had to sign a document saying they wouldn't give it to me. I think maybe they thought I was going to release it to the press or something like that and spoil their big day. But anyway, I went and got it, decided that I would stand there and say, well, no matter what you say about my brother, he's innocent. Because I knew if I didn't go there, the press would be after me. Anyway, we were sitting there having a cup of coffee, having picked it up, and I opened it up. And page 15, and it says on there, on reviewing the reports of previous homicide inquiries, the panel found that it was an unusual feature. The unusual feature is for somebody with a mental health problem to say they're innocent. It's almost unheard of. He goes on. The court process did not reveal any clear motivation for the crime, and none of the material available to the inquiry has provided an explanation for it. Further on, the nurse that saw Mick once, twice, sometimes 3 times a week, she says, I did not think that Michael committed that crime at the time, and on the day of his arrest I did not think he would be accused of it. This report goes through and it says this all the time. They can find no motive for it and no reason to suspect that Mick did it. But I found some quite interesting things in there. Back to the scene of the crime, the one and only reliable seeming witness, she describes the murderer as being 20 to 25, beautiful blonde cropped hair. My brother was really proud. If you look at the back, he was 4 years ago on the photo. Anyway, beautiful blonde cropped hair and smooth arms. I'm looking through this report and it says 2 things. One is my brother's turning up at meetings with a long sleeve shirt on. He does that to cover the trap marks from the heroin injections. And also he's got lots of like prison-made tattoos, as I call them. Somebody, I don't know who knows what about drug abuse, but it's rare that you'll see a heroin user walking along the street with short arms, with short sleeves on their clothes because of the marks. So, and then I look a bit further and it says, before Mick's arrest, that the police were allowed access to this information. And worse than that, the doctor actually sat down with them and explained every detail of his medical history to the police before Mick had even been arrested. Now, if you put those two things together, and then Mick agreed to do an ID parade, I have to ask myself, why then, with this clear witness statement, and the knowledge that the police have, did they then go into the ID parade and made all the suspects in it stand with their arms behind their back? It couldn't have happened by chance. It's almost as if they've said, well, we won't let her see the arms, because once they see the arms, that's it really, because if she describes smooth arms, there's no way. And again, there's a picture up at the back there, I think, put it on the board, which has been enhanced, where you can see some of the tattoos and things, but you've got to bear in mind at the time of the murder, he wouldn't anyway have had short sleeves on because of his heroin use. So that was one thing. 3 minutes. How many? I've got up here at 4 o'clock. It's 20 past. I'm going to argue with you, like I do the police. Anyway, I'm obviously getting shooed out of my spot here, so I'll just run quickly over the other point. This is Mick's killing spree. I'm sure you've all heard about what a mad psychopath he is. He wants to go on a killing spree on the 4th. He's going to kill anyone, men, women, children. Actually, it was his probation officer that he wanted to kill. The threat was quite specific. He breached a confidence, and breaching that confidence had led Mick's girlfriend to dump him. So yes, he was very cross, and he voiced an opinion. But the report then, I won't look because of the time and quote you, but the report then goes on to say that when Mick left, he was joking, he was happy, he was calm, and he made an appointment to see them again on the 10th. So, regardless of what you've heard, that isn't the case. He wasn't in a killing mood by the time he left them that day. But they saw him again on the 10th. The 10th is the day when Mick is supposed to be out with blood over him. This report says that Mick was actually with his nurse at the time the police were presenting the evidence to say that Mick is walking around with blood on him. But I ask you, how can Mick be in a town miles away when he's supposed to be somewhere else being seen with blood on him? And the only explanation is really, I mean, in court it was said that the appointment was held somewhere else, closer to where Mick lived and closer to where the person is who was the witness, Sherry Batten, Court. This report absolutely flies in the face of the police prosecution evidence, and both of these have now given us, all that information together has given us an additional 2 to 3 extra grounds for the CCRC, just by the publication of this that I was so scared of. And I think I'll just leave it there, but I'll say one last thing. In this report, apart from all the stuff that I like to be in there, there's actually quite a lot of information about his mental health. He's set to embellish information, make information up. He acts with the idea of grandiose. He can be delusional. He apparently hallucinates. He can't be trusted. And what's really gutting about this is, this book is enough to say that no self-confession should be admissible to court. And yet my brother, the police, the Kent police, they have been corrupt. They have done everything possible to keep him there. They have leaned on our witnesses. They've nearly killed one of them. And my brother is sitting in prison on a principle because he will not say that he confessed or that his mental health problem in any way has affected his evidence or his memory of that night.
Damages the person who's wrongly accused, convicted, and it damages the family. In fact, I'm still going to the IPCC as it is now, the independent police complaints, because since I came home, I've been harassed by two of the police officers, the two police officers who I know are pretty ill. Since I came home, I've been harassed by them. So I've gone to the police complaints about them. I'm not sure that they are totally independent, I will say, but that's what I've done. And I've mentioned before when I was speaking this morning, I went to the OSS, the official supervision of solicitors, when I was first convicted, because I knew by that time I'd been badly let down by my original solicitor. And they looked into my complaint and they wrote a report which said definitely you've been negligent, could have contributed to a miscarriage of justice, and that I had every good opportunity to sue, but I must never try and do that until the conviction's quashed. And they explained, well, the solicitor they appointed was Mr. Jones, an excellent solicitor, to deal with this issue. And he explained that there was a way of keeping the case on ice. You have to keep extending the time limit for serving a writ. Then McMahon, the QC, decided he might use Mr. Jones at a future appeal, so there might be a conflict of interest. So Mr. Jones had to step down and they handed me to a Mr. Brown of Lomax Geddes, Manchester. And Mr. Brown came on board pro bono as Mr. Jones had been, and never gave me any client care information, so he was pro bono. And without consulting me, and because he slipped up and not extended the time limits on the writ, he went ahead and served this writ on the original solicitor. Not only that, he'd gone as far as the time limit allowed. He should have gone back to court for an extension, so he served it out of time. So he's lost me any chance of ever suing my original solicitor. So he should have kept the case on ice. Mr. Jones explained that to him. So not only did he lose me that opportunity, he then sent me a bill. There is a point to me telling you this tale. He sent me a bill for his services, and he'd done me a disservice. I wasn't going to pay him anything. So while I was in prison, I got took to court various times for this particular issue. He wanted his bill paid, etc. And each time I went to court to fight this, because that's how I do things, and if I know I'm right, I'll fight it. Each time I went to court, the costs were put onto me. So this bill was gone up and up and up and up. To cut a long story short, when I came home from prison, Mr. Brown decided to put land registry order on my home. So that was put on, we went to court about that. The judge was very nice and explained that I had to worry, this was just to secure the so-called debt. However, a few weeks ago, I got another letter saying I was in court again. Mr. Brown was taking me to court again. Not only was he not happy with this land registry order he put on the house, but it was an order of sale that I was going to divorce to sell my home. We go back to a lot what Jenny said of the consequences of an injustice, of how things can, your whole family, your whole life can be completely damaged. And I've got to be honest with you, with all what I've gone through and everything since I came home, it's not been easy. I really thought I was going to go under a few weeks ago. I thought I just can't cope with anymore. But I thought, no, I know I'm right, so I'll fight it. So off I go to court again. And thank you very much. This particular judge in this case was brilliant. He wiped the floor with Mr. Brown, and I won that case. And it's such an uplifting, I couldn't disclose how I feel when I'm in the appeal, because I said when, because I'm sure I will in the main appeal, because I was so uplifted in that court, because I went thinking, this is it now, they're going to tell me I'm going to have to sell my home, the home which my children kept going for me for 13, 14 years. And the home I was born in, actually, I was born there, and I thought, I'm going to lose all that now. Anyway, that's not the case. The judge wiped the floor with Mr. Brown, and Mr. Brown is a district judge. It makes you question, what's going on here? Because Mr. Brown's a district judge, but he was taking me through this process. But anyway, this judge, and I'm telling you this tale because I think Mark mentioned that the CCRC used to have a list of solicitors that might be willing to work pro bono to just look at a case, and it's not there anymore. And this is what we need. We need a list of sorts of good and bad solicitors. I'm sure all of you can name at least one solicitor that's let you down badly. And you might have a solicitor that you've got confidence in now. So let's name and shame, and let's have a list also of solicitors that we feel we have confidence in that could be reliable. The person you're campaigning for knows their case best, but you on the out have to know the case as well as that person. And it's very important. So we get good solicitors and we feel confidence in them, but don't think then that you can just sit back. It's really, really important that you keep pushing that solicitor, giving him any information, asking have they looked at this point, have they looked at that point, when they said they're waiting for a report, keep pushing. Oh, I know all these things take an awful long time, but Even if your solicitor's a good solicitor, hope you don't understand this, Mark, keep pushing them, and the same with the CCRC. Thank you.
I'm so glad, Susan, they kept you to the end because you've given us exactly the right note in which to begin to wind up today. Thank you very much for what you said. I have myself now to apologise because this is the weekend of the annual conference at CND where I belong, and I've skipped the Saturday and I'm going over now on the train to Bradford, so I have to leave and Kevin's going to come and take the chair. But I'd like to say before I leave, I really feel that these days, to me, are very, very important. I'm just pursuing one case diligently over many years, and sometimes there isn't very much hope. But to come to this sort of gathering and feel that there are so many people who have the similar problems, I get such encouragement from other people, and I'm sure you do as well, that sometimes there are successes and sometimes there's more disappointments, but we're all working together, not just on individual cases, I think, but as I go into it, more on changing, or as well, on changing the whole structure of the penal system in this country, which has such injustice attached to it, and is so arbitrary. So I think for me it's an enormous support and help. And I remember a book once by Ludovic Kennedy, who was dealing with some wrongly convicted people. And at the end of the book he said, the persons who really impressed me were not actually the people who were wrongly convicted, though they certainly impressed me, but what impressed me was the persistence of so many friends and family who kept that case in the limelight and kept going. So I think that's what we all are, and thank you for having me, and if I can help in any small way with any particular case, do get in touch. But anyway, I'm delighted to come along and sit in the chair here occasionally and to run meetings in London as well. So thanks very much, and bye-bye.
Questions. Just to remind you, I did earlier that we've got to pay for this meeting somehow. So there's a donation bucket on the way out if you could all give generously as you go make your way over to the Philharmonic Hall, which is where we're going for an informal meeting after that. So right, I'm sure you found that what a diverse bunch of speakers we've had tonight this afternoon. Very, very interesting, I found it. And I always learn something here when I come to these meetings. So, we'll just start. Any questions, address them to anyone you like, or just address them generally.
I missed the name of the white.
Satish?
How do you spell it? S-A-T.
S-E-K-A-R.
Any more questions? Yes, right up there.
The pathologist, I think, we all have corrupt pathologists in our cases. It's not just the one that you're talking about. We've all got one. And as soon as the jury hears what he has to say, we haven't got a threat. And there's nothing we could do about it because we didn't know at the time we could challenge it. And our lawyers, they're not going to challenge it.
Did you have a defence pathologist?
Never came.
They weren't called? Or?
No. I think it probably happened to quite a few people.
What you could do is, there are actually some pathologists. I mean, the reason Michael Heath and Paul Alanis got found out is that there were other forensic pathologists who were courageous enough to stand up and say, this is not acceptable, they are disgracing our profession, and we're going to do something about it. Now, those pathologists, what you can do is, well, speak to me afterwards and I will give you the names of other pathologists that you can approach. And generally, the way you approach them is through a solicitor and ask them whether they could actually review the pathology evidence of both the defence and prosecution and they will basically tell you how much it will cost to do it, how much time it will cost, and then get on and do it. But they'll actually establish what they can do for free if you find the right ones, and I can tell you where to go.
Next question, please. I'm sure. Yes, we've got one here in front.
I'll wait because I wanted to say sorry, my name's Kevin Pryor. I'm from Manchester. I waited deliberately to see whether there were going to be several questions or not, because I've got several, but I want to tie it to one particular campaigning point. It seems to me that in relation to this whole question of injustice, it's a big spectrum. I'd like to say thank you to the speakers who have actually suffered today, and spoken today in terms of their suffering. But that spectrum ranges right back to people who are simply wrongfully arrested, wrongfully charged, and who are then acquitted because of the lack of evidence on the basis of fabrications that have gone on in terms of false allegations and conspiracy to pervert the course of justice. But what strikes me about this meeting today is that it's been fantastic to hear the stories, and the question really seems to be about what next in terms of action, and that we're actually fighting this campaign tonight with not just one hand behind our back, but our legs shot from under us because of this whole issue about funding. And I've got a proposal to make in terms of people sat at the table and other people in this room, that we should actually, this afternoon, this evening, get together in terms of some sort of organising body to submit a proper funding bid, say through the big lottery fund, to be able to pull this together properly. I'm just asking the panel really whether they think that's a good idea, and whether there are people on the floor who would also like to join in on that, because there's been a whole number of different issues raised today that need addressing.
Yeah, maybe I can just answer some of that. Of course, the idea of funding organisations to campaign and to provide information is a good idea, and it's not that it hasn't been tried. It has. There's various organisations who've gone that route and have been partially successful. It hasn't quite come off. Of course, at the moment, Paddy Hill is trying to raise money for aftercare, a separate aspect in itself. But it's not that it hasn't been tried, it has. That doesn't mean it can't be tried again. You're absolutely right. So if you've worked it out somehow how you do it, I think a lot of people are pleased to know that.
Well, I'd like to meet with anybody, I'd like them to meet with anybody who's interested in that afterwards, because I do have some specific proposals that addresses the various points of concern that have been raised today in terms of provision of services and support and all that.
Right, well, quite right, and that's a discussion I think we can continue with you after the meeting, if it's over in the